Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore. The headlines. A bridge collapses in the American city of Miami. At least 4 people are confirmed to have died. A rescue operation is underway to help those who are still trapped. President Trump joins the international chorus in blaming Moscow for the poisoning of a Russian spy in the UK.
Very sad situation. It certainly looks like the Russians were behind it. Something that should never, ever happen.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also in this programme, fresh evidence from inside China of the impact of new regulations on religion, including the destruction of this Christian mural. And thousands of young people will be gathering across the UK to call for world peace. We'll be hearing from just some of them.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London and 9 p.m. in Miami, Florida, where police have confirmed that at least 4 people died when a pedestrian bridge collapsed onto a highway. Emergency services are working to rescue those still trapped in vehicles under the bridge. According to local media, the 950-ton structure was only installed last Saturday. Gary O'Donoghue reports.
Scrambling to rescue the trapped and injured after 950 tons of the newly installed pedestrian bridge crashed down onto the road below. A number of vehicles were crushed as the bridge came down shortly before 2 in the afternoon. The emergency services dashing to help those pinned under the concrete. The footbridge had only just been completed, designed to take students from the Florida International University safely across a 6-lane highway to their accommodation.
What was soon to become an iconic staple part in the connectivity between the city and the university has actually turned out to be a national tragedy. Our hearts are here, extended out to the victims that were actually able to be transported away, as well as those that won't be walking away from the scene.
The collapsed section of the bridge was only put in place last Saturday, using a method known as advanced bridge construction, designed to be fast and cause the least disruption as possible to traffic. The National Transportation Safety Board says it's sending investigators to the scene, and the building company employed to put up the bridge, MCM, says it will cooperate fully. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News.
And a short while ago, Miami-Dade Police Director Juan Perez said the rescue operation was complex and would take time.
I realize that this is going to be a long process. Because to get through that rubble and the pieces of concrete that are laying there is not going to be an easy task. So we will be depending on our fire department to help us get through that process so that we could recover whatever deceased individuals may be under that bridge. And obviously, because our homicide is leading the efforts, we all know that that is what it's leaning toward. At that point, we will continue to advise you as we get information as to the number of victims that are underneath that rubble. Obviously, if there's anybody that's alive that can be rescued, that you'll be the first to know.
We also heard from Florida Governor Rick Scott, who promised a full inquiry into the tragedy.
There will clearly be an investigation to find out exactly what happened and why this happened, and we will hold anybody accountable if anybody's done anything wrong. But the most important thing we can do right now is pray for the individuals that ended up in the hospital for their full recovery. Pray for the family members that have lost loved ones. But I know we're going to all want to do our best to try to find out exactly what happened here, and we will do that in a transparent manner. And again, if anybody's done anything wrong, we'll hold them accountable.
Florida Governor there, Rick Scott, of course, will continue to monitor as that rescue operation continues. But now let's bring you up to date with some of the day's other news. We're going to stay in the United States because the country has imposed sanctions on 19 Russian individuals and 5 groups, accusing them of meddling in the 2016 presidential election and also cyber attacks attacks. Washington says that its aim is to counter Russia's continuing destabilizing activities. Now, one of the individuals targeted is known as Putin's chef and has direct links to the president. Well, from Washington, Chris Buckler told us a little more about this chef.
The individual you're just talking about, it's alleged that he ran the Internet Research Agency. His name is Yevgeny Prigozhin, and he's an oligarch and very close to Vladimir Putin, and he is one of the main individuals named in these sanctions, and he has also, of course, been named in the Robert Mueller investigation into allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. So there's a bit of crossover here between Robert Mueller's investigation taking place into that and also some wider cyber attacks. Those wider cyber attacks include alleged attacks on infrastructure in the United States, including the electricity grid, something that they take very seriously indeed. And sometimes some of President Trump's critics have said that this administration has not been strong in terms of language against Russia. Certainly this is strong action. Certainly it is something which has come shortly after the attack in England, in which a former spy, of course, was attacked with this poison, and this has been something completely separate. But it does follow also a strong statement about that from America. So I think you're getting these very, very strong words, but also action. I have to say, though, from Yevgeny Prigozhin's point of view, he says that he's not at all concerned that this kind of thing has happened to him before and that he has no US business interests.
Chris Buckler there in Washington. He touched upon the Russian spy attack in the UK. We'll have more on that story in a moment. But now let's bring you up to date with some of the other stories making the news. More than 12,000 people have been fleeing Syria's eastern Ghouta area of eastern Ghouta as government forces advance. Men, women and children have been seen leaving the town of Hamouria, which is near Damascus. It is the first medical evacuation since a massive assault began nearly a month ago. A law has come into effect in Indonesia, making it illegal to criticise the country's parliament or the politicians who work there. The Indonesian President, Joko Widodo, refused to sign the legislation but was unable to veto it. HSBC says its female staff in the UK earned nearly 60% less last year than their male colleagues. The gender pay gap is the largest reported by a British bank. HSBC says that there's a high percentage of women in junior or part-time positions, while under a quarter of senior roles are filled by females. It has apparently been raining gold in Russia. This is a runway which has been covered in gold and silver bars. The precious metal fell out of an aircraft while it was taking off. Around 200 of these gold and silver bars were scattered across the tarmac of Yakutsk Airport, which is in Siberia, and it happened when the plane's holding hatch broke off. Bad news for treasure hunters, though. All of the cargo has been recovered.
Now, Australia will be playing host this weekend to a special meeting of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull will be welcoming regional leaders, including the controversial Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, as well as Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi. Rights groups have been urging Australia to raise issues of human rights abuse, not just a focus on trade and counter-terrorism. Well, Jawad Kabir is from the Burmese Rohingya community in Australia, and he says he plans to join demonstrations against Aung San Suu Kyi. I asked him earlier what he hoped to achieve.
We're hoping Australia will negotiate with her and disagreement with her actions. And disagreement doesn't mean disengagement. Australia still can engage, but her action, her silence, her ignorance, Australia can focus on this, and then the Rohingya safe return.
How desperate, in your view, is the situation of the Rohingya minority? Do you still have friends, relatives still trying to flee the violence?
The members, the community members, they're stuck. They're not peacefully living inside, still who are living in the Afghan state, and they're still desperate to cross the border because they don't feel safe. They don't feel belong to there anymore. And then I was talking with one of my community member who recently who went to Bangladesh, and he was telling me about the stories and unspeakable and the situation in Bangladesh and as well as in Burma, in Arghar state.
What's your view on Aung San Suu Kyi? Because, of course, she was once a champion of human rights, but now she's been heavily criticized by the international community for the lack of actions.
As you know, our community, our Rohingya ethnicity has been suffering decades. Aung San Suu Kyi was the last hope of our community, for our people. We were hoping that she going to release and make some changes and give us the same right as other Burmese people or other community, other ethnicity. But it's turned out to be totally against. She gave a big slave to our community, not only Rohingya in international community. She lose all the hope. She lose all the respect.
That was Jawat Kabir from the Burmese Rohingya community based in Australia. Now, President Trump has joined France, Germany and the United Kingdom in issuing a joint statement laying the blame for the nerve agent attack in the English city of Salisbury firmly on Russia. The statement said that the first offensive use of a nerve agent in Europe since World War II was an assault on British sovereignty. Russia continues to deny any involvement. James Landale reports.
This was Theresa May's first visit to Salisbury since the nerve agent attack. A chance to be briefed by the police and public experts, but also a chance to meet and reassure members of the public whose lives have been so disrupted.
The spirit of the people that live here, I think, has been fantastic. Yeah.
She visited the scene of the attack on the former Russian intelligence officer and his daughter 11 days ago, the restaurant where they ate, the park bench under a tent where they were found. The Prime Minister thanked some of the police officers who first responded to the call.
Well, thank you. What you did is what the police do day in and day out. You go to a routine call, as you say. You don't know what you're finding. You don't know what's there.
And then at the local hospital, she met and thanked Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, who's still recovering from exposure to the nerve agent. Russia, she said, was guilty of a brazen and despicable attack. She'd expelled 23 of its diplomats, but was ready to do more.
There are other measures that we will be looking at, and if we face further provocation from Russia, then there are other measures that we can deploy. But what is important in the international arena, and we have taken this into NATO, into the United Nations, we'll be taking it through into the European Union, is that allies are standing alongside us.
That came in a joint statement from the leaders of Britain, France, Germany and the US, blaming Russia for what they called an assault on UK sovereignty. We call on Russia to address all questions related to the attack in Salisbury, the statement said. Russia should in particular provide full and complete disclosure of the Novichok program to the chemical weapons watchdog.
I spoke with the Prime Minister and we are in deep discussions, a very sad situation. It certainly looks like the Russians were behind it, something that should never ever happen, and we're taking it very seriously, as I think are many others.
The joint statement is significant because it shows that the Foreign Office and Downing Street are convincing Britain's allies that the Salisbury attack is different, that it represents an escalation of Russia's hostile behaviour. And as such, those allies are now ready to crank up the pressure on Moscow. That diplomacy continued today in Brussels, where British security officials briefed NATO allies. The head of the alliance said Russia had clearly breached international agreements.
First of all, I think it's extremely important to express strong political support to the United Kingdom. Sending a clear message that the United Kingdom is not alone. We stand together with them.
In Moscow, President Putin discussed the Salisbury case with his ministers, who denied that Russia or the Soviet Union had ever run a Novichok nerve agent program, and promised to respond soon to the expulsion of its diplomats. The Porton Down Military Research Laboratory, which identified the nerve agent, is to get an extra £48 million in funding. Ministers confirmed it would also provide a sample to the chemical watchdog. Ministers whose diplomacy is not extending to Russia.
If you're a nation and another nation has launched a nerve agent attack on your people, I think we have every right to tell Russia to shut up and go away.
Meanwhile, this afternoon near Salisbury, the investigation continued, with the army recovering a car from the village of Alderholt, near the home of D.S. Bailey. James Landale, BBC News.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC, still to come on the programme. Is this cultural vandalism or clamping down on extremism? How China's new rules on religion are restricting freedom of worship. Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Coy in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top story this hour: a pedestrian bridge has collapsed onto a busy motorway in the American city of Miami, killing 4 people. Emergency crews are working to reach those still trapped under the rubble.
President Trump has joined France, Germany and the UK in issuing a joint statement laying the blame for the nerve agent attack in the English city of Salisbury firmly on Russia. And an elderly woman who has chosen a life of backpacking in her retirement has won millions of fans on Chinese social media. That story is doing well on bbc.com. And let's take a look at some front pages from around the world. And we start with the Arab News, which takes a look at the woman Donald Trump wants to see take over the CIA. Jean Haspel has been nominated for the job, but the article talks about the controversy surrounding her involvement in a secret Thai prison during the administration of President George W. Bush. Meanwhile, on the front page of the South China Morning Post is an idea on how to tackle the housing shortage in Hong Kong. The authorities are considering imposing a tax on property developers who are hanging on to empty flats. And bad news for drivers here in Singapore, if you didn't know already. The Gulf News are reporting not only is it the most expensive place to live, but if you want to buy a very basic car, you'll need to spend more than $70,000. Now, those are the papers. Kasia, what are people talking about online?
Well, I'll tell you what, Mariko, that story that you mentioned fits into what people are really looking at online. And I wonder what this says about us, because people are really keen to find out what is the happiest country in the world. What does that say about us? I can tell you, wait for it, it is Finland in Europe. The country has overtaken Norway as the happiest nation on earth. And that's according to the UN's latest World Happiness Report. Yes, that is a thing. Denmark, Iceland and Switzerland are also in the top 5. The annual ranking asks residents in 156 countries to rate their lives. It also looks at factors like economic strength, life expectancy, and also perceived corruption. Weather, I'm sure, plays a role too. So yes, you can check that out on our website. That story being very popular on the internet.
Now, it feels like another cultural revolution. Those are the words of members of China's churches about the renewed clampdown on their activities that started 6 weeks ago. On the 1st of February, new regulations for religious affairs approved by the Party Congress started to be applied, and they ban religious organizations from using religion to harm national security or disrupt a social order. And as David Campanelli now reports, the authorities are demolishing some churches and removing crosses from many others.
This is what happens to churches that are seen as a threat to China's ruling Communist Party. The Golden Lampstand Church in Linfen in Shaanxi province was blown up by dynamite in January and then finished off by bulldozers. An eyewitness told the BBC that numerous police prevented some of the 50,000 congregation from approaching. State media quoted an unidentified official as saying the evangelical church had been secretly constructed without proper permits. Exclusive pictures sent to the BBC show Christian murals being destroyed in the clampdown. Crosses have also been removed from church buildings. China watchers blame new regulations limiting freedom of worship, approved at last year's party congress.
It shows this is a new kind of a new cultural revolution is happening under the Emperor Xi, and really the religious persecution have never been seen, such worse since the end of a cultural revolution.
Christians meeting in unregistered locations risk heavy fines. In some provinces, notices have been issued banning children from attending worship services or going to Sunday school. Despite the clampdown, there are more Christians in China than Communist Party members. Up to 100 million believers are expected at services to celebrate Easter in a few weeks' time. David Campanale, BBC News.
Earlier this week, thousands of US students staged school walkouts to protest against gun violence. Well, in the UK this weekend, 6,000 young people will gather in 3 cities to show their solidarity. The event is called Generation Hope, and Global Network for Peace is a documentary specially commissioned for the gathering. Earlier, I was joined by 2 people who are participating in the gathering. Sanya Rajpal, who features in the documentary, which is asking for peace, and Josie Parkhouse, who has spoken at the UN on nuclear disarmament. Well, Sanya explained how they're mobilising people to stand up for world peace.
I think it really comes down to having dialogue and really inspiring young people particularly that they can get up and they can change society in the way that they need to, and to create a society that they deserve.
And to get really active. And Josie, you've been very active in that path. Yeah. You've spoken at the UN. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I spoke at the UN. I represented a youth organisation, and I guess my central message was that youth, we're hopeful about the future, and we want change, and we don't want a future with nuclear weapons, with war. We want a peaceful future, that, a great peaceful future.
And Global Network for Peace is a documentary specially commissioned, directed by Meave Murphy for this occasion. Sanya, you feature in it. Just tell us a little bit about what the message is of the documentary.
So the documentary is, among other things, a collection of young people sharing their personal experiences of how they have really gone out of their way to transform whatever is stopping them, and through that, going out into society and having a real impact. So personally, from somebody who didn't feel like they had a voice or couldn't really see how they could communicate effectively with others, was able to kind of communicate and work with thousands of young people and speak in Parliament about how young people's education can be created in a way that will really make them the centre of society.
And the documentary, just to explain, it had elements of Japan post-Hiroshima. Of course, Josie, that's something that you're looking for, denuclearization. The documentary talks about the impact of war and then how to achieve peace. It's such a big ask.
It is a big ask, but I think at the end of the day, as a Buddhist movement, we really focus on the individual. So we're not always talking at the United Nations. We're talking one-on-one. We're spreading this message of hope, of peace. It seems like a big ask, but when you look at it small, daily, day by day, talking with just your friends and family about peace, then it seems a bit more manageable, I suppose.
The little steps. Now, when it comes, you say little things, but when you're talking about 6,000 young people gathering in these 3 locations across the UK, that's not a little thing. No. What can you expect during those gatherings?
So I think it's going to be a number of personal experiences of young people overcoming anxiety, depression, illness, bullying. There's going to be some wonderful cultural performances, dance, music, spoken words and DJs. So it's really focused at young people speaking their language to really mobilize them into creating this incredible society together.
Really interactive events. And Josie, how important is the religious aspect in this?
I think the religious aspect is quite central. I mean, as Buddhists, we really respect the dignity of each individual. And I think the aim of this event is to say every individual that's attending to feel that kind of respect and worthy and able to really transform their lives in whatever way, whatever way suits them, really.
Sonia and Josie there just explaining a little bit more about those big events that will be taking place across the UK over the weekend. 6,000 young people gathering to call for peace. Now, don't go away because we've got lots more coming up in a few moments. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.